What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 16, sleepers and studs. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to give you a sleeper pick and my favorite stud at each position. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, NFL Week 16, let's take a look at the quarterback position. My quarterback stud is Deshaun Watson from the Houston Texans playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who have the 12th worst defense overall, and they've been middle of the pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Deshaun Watson has averaged 24.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6 rush attempts per game. He scored 27, 17, and 24 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He's going to be about 10% owned, projected at 23 fantasy points here in Week 16, and he's $7,600 DraftKings salary and $900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 46 points scored in this game, with the Houston Texans favored by 7.5. So I know the Cincinnati Bengals are coming off of a big win versus the Steelers. I think that was their high point. I think we're going to see their low point this week versus the Houston Texans. So I like Deshaun Watson here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, my quarterback sleeper pick. Now I'm just going to rattle off a few names for you here and then give you my favorite. But Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, and Matt Ryan, they're all coming in at about 2 to 3% ownership. And my favorite sleeper pick out of the bunch there is Jared Goff from the LA Rams playing the Seattle Seahawks, who have the 9th worst defense overall, and they give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Jared Goff has averaged 18.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3.1 rush attempts per game. He's only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 18.3 fantasy points here in Week 16, and he's $5,900 DraftKings salary and $1,500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Rams trailing by 1. So you got a fantastic matchup and a close competitive game. Also, Cam Akers is out, so I think it's going to be a passing game script here. So I like Jared Goff here versus the Seattle Seahawks. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. My running back stud is David Montgomery from the Chicago Bears playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have the absolute worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. David Montgomery has averaged 17.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 15.5 rush attempts per game and 4.4 pass targets per game. He scored 32, 28, and 27 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 32, 11, and 17 rush attempts. So David Montgomery has come out of nowhere the past few games to be an absolute daily fantasy stud. 32 rush attempts last game, unbelievable volume. Now he's got a juicy matchup here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So he's going to be about 30% owned, projected at 18.1 fantasy points here in Week 16, and he's $7,700 DraftKings salary and $100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Chicago Bears favored by 7.5. So amazing matchup, a running game script. So I like David Montgomery here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Okay, now ownership-wise, this isn't really a sleeper pick, but a lot of people may forget about this player because he hasn't really played well all season. He's been a backup, but now he's going to be the starting running back because of the injury to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, so I like Le'Veon Bell from the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and although they've been pretty good versus opposing running backs, Le'Veon Bell scored 15 fantasy points off of 15 rush attempts and 1 pass target last week when he came in for the injured Clyde Edwards-Helaire, so he's going to be about 20% owned, projected at 13.3 fantasy points here in Week 16, and he's $5,800 DraftKings salary and $600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 54 points scored in this game, with the Kansas City Chiefs favored by 10.5. So you got a super high scoring game and a running game script. Look for Le'Veon Bell to get a ton of work in this game, so I like Le'Veon Bell here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. My wide receiver stud is Cooper Kupp from the LA Rams playing the Seattle Seahawks, who have the 9th worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Cooper Kupp has averaged 14.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.2 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 8% owned, projected at 14.7 fantasy points here in Week 16. He's $6,600 DraftKings salary and $200 more on FanDuel. So we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Rams trailing by 1. Great matchup here. Seattle Seahawks have been bad defensively versus wide receivers all year long. So great matchup for Cooper Kupp. And he's a little bit less expensive than Robert Woods. Although I like Robert Woods as well. You could go with either of these wide receivers here in this Rams-Seattle game. But I like Cooper Kupp here versus the Seattle Seahawks. Okay, my wide receiver sleeper pick is Rashard Higgins from the Cleveland Browns playing the New York Jets, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Rashard Higgins, he's averaged 9.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.1 pass targets per game. But take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 12, 19, and 22 fantasy points in his last 3 games off of 5, 10, and 9 pass targets. He's only going to be about 1% owned, projected at 11.8 fantasy points here in Week 16, and he's $4,800 DraftKings salary and $1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Cleveland Browns favored by 9.5. Now, the New York Jets are pretty good versus the run, so that should force the Browns to pass the ball. Fantastic matchup here, so I like Rashard Higgins here versus the New York Jets. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. My tight end stud, no other than Travis Kelce from the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Travis Kelce has averaged 22.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.4 pass targets per game. He scored 23, 31, and 31 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 12, 10, and 13 pass targets. He's going to be about 26% owned, projected at 20.2 fantasy points here in Week 16. He's $8,500 DraftKings salary and 300 more on FanDuel. So we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 54 points scored in this game, with the Kansas City Chiefs favored by 10.5. So fantastic matchup here, high scoring game. Travis Kelce has got high pass volume and high production all season long, so his price tag is warranted. So I like Travis Kelce here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, my tight end sleeper pick is Tyler Eifert from the Jacksonville Jaguars playing the Chicago Bears, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, but they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Tyler Eifert has averaged 6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.1 pass targets per game. He scored 8 fantasy points last game off of 4 pass targets. He's only going to be about 3% owned, and the reason I like this sleeper pick is because he's only $3,000 DraftKings salary and $1,600 more on FanDuel. And he is projected at 6.7 fantasy points here in Week 16. So at $3,000 DraftKings salary, if you're looking for one of those near minimum salary players to open up the salary in the rest of your lineup so you can fit those studs in, Tyler Eifert, he's getting pass targets. He's got a fantastic matchup this week, so he could find his way into the end zone. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Jaguars trailing by 7.5. So great matchup and a passing game script. So I like Tyler Eifert here versus the Chicago Bears. If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.